They sold my house, forged my name, and counted the cash while I was out of state. They smiled like family. They called it survival. I called it theft. I built a quiet case and waited. When the sheriff knocked, they learned what happens when love is turned into a ledger, and justice is patient. When I tell this story, I don't shout. I don't need to. This is not the kind of vengeance that ends with fireworks, guns, or a carnival of spectacle. This is the kind of vengeance that arrives in plain envelopes, quiet phone calls, and perfectly timed filings. This is the kind of justice that uses the law as the scalpel it was meant to be. I grew up in Texas with the kind of family that taught me how to fix a fence, how to patch a roof, and how to say, "We're good," even when we weren't. That upbringing taught me patience. It taught me the procedure. It taught me how to keep receipts. You'll want to know the amount. You'll want the number because numbers make a theft feel concrete, not like a rumor. It was $4,800,000. $4,800,000. That number is not just a sum, it's a storyboard. Late-night wires, cashier's checks, deeds re-signed, forged notarizations. It is the measure of how comfortable my family had grown with the idea that my absence meant my losses could be rewritten. They thought they had rewritten my life. They were wrong. The story begins with a trip. It's always small choices that set the stage. I went on business for 3 months. Meetings, conventions, a sales cycle that kept me across state lines. My mother insisted I take the long flight. "You deserve it," she said. My sister asked if I could bring something from the city, something that meant nothing beyond the polite kindness of a sibling. I hugged them both, loaded my car, and left. In the back of my head I had the soft confidence of someone who believed root problems are solved by conversation, not confrontation. I carry that confidence still, like a coat I will one day take off. The first sign I could not explain was small. A notice from the county assessor that an update had been filed on my property. I ignored it. Bureaucracy is clumsy and sometimes slow. But the second sign was a phone call from my lender asking if I had authorized a transfer. That time I bristled. I called my mother. The call was casual. "We're just getting things in order," she said. That was the phrase I would hear again and again in the months to come. Just getting things in order. If I could suspend disbelief and listen, I should have let the alarm ring louder. When I returned to town, I found a locked mailbox and a set of new curtains at my house that didn't match what I remembered. My nameplate at the gate had been removed. When I walked up the path, my sister leaned against a new truck, like a queen who had arrived late but wished to appear on time. She smiled, and the smile was the kind that had been practiced in bedroom mirrors. My mother stood on the porch with a smile meant to soften whatever news lay ahead. That afternoon they told me the house had been sold. The money had helped my sister keep her life afloat. The tone was almost cheerful, as if tragedy were simply a scheduling problem they had resolved. They expected a reaction. People who commit betrayals like that expect heat, a show. They expected me to beg, to plead, to forgive. Instead I smiled. I learned the power of a smile that doesn't match your heart early. It keeps others from seeing the gears. They thought they had engineered my silence through absence. They had engineered precisely what they needed, complacency. In that silence, I heard the rhythm of a plan forming in my head. I didn't call the police that day. I didn't storm the street. I did only the thing a person betrayed and literate about the law would do. I observed. I made a note of names, dates, and small inconsistencies. When my sister produced a notarized document and waved it like a flag, I asked to see the paperwork. Her face was practiced. Her lip twitched the way a liar does when a question is too close to the truth. She handed me forms that looked real. Seals, initials, stamps from offices that sounded official. But I know deeds. I've read enough closing statements to make a broker uncomfortable. The first strategic move was to quietly secure the originals. I contacted my attorney and said plainly, "I want everything related to the property examined." He took it seriously because he knew me. That's the next part people miss. Revenge with any hope of surviving public scrutiny needs allies who understand procedure. So I hired a forensic title examiner, a tax expert, a handwriting analyst, and a private investigator. I paid them like any investor would pay for a portfolio audit. Upfront, without drama, because delays would be useful to those who had taken my life and less useful to me. They found things I didn't want to see but needed to see. A power of attorney had been submitted with my name. The signature was mine visually, until they magnified the strokes and found pauses that no healthy signature contains. The notary's stamp had a date that didn't match the postmarked envelope. A bank transfer began from an account under a shell company with an address that traced back to an LLC my sister had only recently created. The sale documents were real enough to fool a casual eye, but the chain of title had holes the size of Texas. Every hole was a chance for the law to step in. I didn't want to use those holes to make them suffer in front of the neighborhood. I wanted them dismantled by the slow gears of accountability. People who take from family think family will bite its lip. They assume the threshold for legal pain in domestic matters is higher because of shame in relationships. I planned around that assumption. If they counted on my reluctance to drag them into the courthouse, they were right. But they had not accounted for the quiet, cold arithmetic of someone who had studied the law long enough to respect it. I started with drawing pieces of paper like a surgeon taking out stitches, an old mortgage release, an earlier lien that had never been cleared, a title hitch caused by the transfer years earlier. Pattern recognition is a skill. Once you see the pattern, you can predict the next steps. The next thing I did was create a distance that felt like distance but had no effect on the trail I was making. In other words, I gave them the illusion of time. People take advantage of time because it softens anger and dissolves evidence in human memory. I created false moves. I rented a small apartment away, posted pictures from meetings, traveled when convenient to validate my absence. None of this was showmanship for them, it was practical camouflage. While they were counting the cash, I was counting the steps needed to compel a state attorney to pursue the leads. In Texas, as anywhere, evidence must be tidy and provable. Emotion is dangerous in a courtroom. Documentation is not. When you build a case quietly, you learn the value of small facts. A receptionist's recollection that a certain person came into the office on a specific Tuesday at noon can be corroborated with an elevator log, with surveillance footage, with parking tickets. A forged signature is more obvious when you have a professional who can lay it out for a district attorney with the kind of language prosecutors prefer. Inconsistent pressure, unnatural pen lifts, absence of authentic idiosyncratic flourishes. I did not persuade the DA with rhetoric. I gave him a microscope. There was a moment, months into this operation, when my mother reached out and asked to meet. She wanted to clear the air. That phrase again, clear the air, as if air were a ledger that could be balanced with a coffee and a smile. I accepted the meeting. People who manipulate expect conciliatory gestures. It makes them feel safe. We sat at a diner table the color of a legally signed document. She spoke of family, of pressures, of wanting to protect her daughter. I listened. I asked neutral questions. She answered them as people do when guilt is fresh and still tender. She did not know then that the handwriting analyst had prepared a brief that made her forgeries legally visible. She didn't know the private eye had 37 photographs of her at the county records office. Shame is quiet, it was building. When I filed the complaint, I did not do it hastily. I worked with an attorney who had been a prosecutor and therefore knew the rhythm of offices that decide what is worth charging. That attorney taught me how to present things, with seriousness, with corroboration, and with an understanding of the burden of proof. We prepared a packet that included original documents, memory stuff, timelines, bank transfers, phone logs, and sworn statements from third parties. The packet was short in words and heavy in evidence. The best brief is never an endless story, it is a direct map to reasonable doubt. There's an art to timing. The law is like poker. Patience wins when you know the other players will make impatient moves. I filed the complaint during a quiet week for the DA, not during a headline case, but in a moment when the office could afford the attention and when the scale of the alleged fraud could be investigated without political pressure to bury it in a backlog. I wasn't trying to make headlines, I was trying to ensure the law did its work. The DA's office called. They asked for copies. They asked to interview me. I answered simply, I would be available. I let the legal machinery wind up. When the sheriff finally knocked on my mother and sister's door, it was my job to not be there. Presence can erase the power of the law's performance. I watched from a distance as sworn officers read a warrant. I watched my mother's face turn that slow, blanching color that comes when the world falls into its most honest shape. My sister's practiced smile failed in the first 30 seconds. That's not the kind of satisfaction you can market. It is a private, precise moment that belongs to a person who has designed justice rather than revenge. They were arrested on charges that were surgical: forgery, fraud, conspiracy to commit theft, money laundering. Each charge had a ribbon of evidence. The $4.8 million did not arrive as a single check in a courtroom. It arrived as a trail of small transfers, each of which could be shown to have been directed toward shell accounts, toward purchases inconsistent with legitimate business needs, and toward cash-outs that were suspicious in their timing and beneficiaries. Money is only numbers until a prosecutor shows how those numbers relate to intent and to beneficiaries. The DA did that. The sheriff did that. I watched because it was important to me to see the law carry the weight it promised. After the arrests, a curious thing happened that people who live in stories rarely account for. The aftermath is prosaic. Papers need signing, hearings need scheduling, custody arrangements need negotiating. The narrative arc had its chord, but life required forms and lunches and people to explain to neighbors what had happened. Somewhere between the legal victories and the administrative chores I felt a space open, an emptiness that was not relief so much as recalibration. Justice had been served in the public sense. But there remained the private calculations of loss and recompense. When a judge ruled in civil court to reverse the fraudulent sale and order restitution, it felt almost anticlimactic. The law restored the title, and the court instructed the parties to unwind transactions. The $4.8 million could not be conjured back in a second. Financial reversals move with the glacier-like slowness of bank processes. But the ruling was important. It returned the ledger to a state consistent with reality. The house, the real house, opened its doors again to me with locks and a new clarity. Some neighbors clapped at the gate, others looked away. I walked through my home and saw the places where memory had lived and where betrayal had tried to plant its flag. People ask if I felt vindicated when my mother and sister were sentenced to probation and, later, to jail time. People ask if the absence of loud revenge left me wanting. The answer is complicated. Justice is not blood. It is accountability. When a person you grew up with sits in a courtroom and reads an apology that sounds like a legal instrument, you are forced to care about the civic dimension of wrongdoing. I wanted them held responsible. I wanted the state to tell them, with its voice and authority, that their actions were not small and could not be absorbed by family secrecy. That was achieved. But nothing the court did returned the trust. That was not its job. The coldness that accompanied my actions was not cruelty, it was a refusal to be further victimized. There is a difference. Cruelty seeks to leave someone damaged as punishment. The legal strategy one used sought to restore balance and to deter future theft. If you are reading this as someone who is considering retribution in their own life, hear this. Law is not vengeance, but it has a satisfying finality that private revenge never does. The DA's finding, the judge's signature, the restitution order. These are not melodramatic fireworks. They are the closing of account books. People also ask about the financial side. Did I get the $4.8 million back? The full amount in exact cash did not simply appear in my bank account with fanfare. Some funds were recovered, some were tied up in other litigious claims, and some disappeared into shell entities that took years to unwind. The victory was systemic and moral. The fraudulent sale was reversed, liens were cleared, and the transactional chain was exposed. The criminals had to answer for what they did in ways that limited their future ability to repeat it. For that reason alone, the cost was worth it. There is a quiet learning in all this. The first lesson was the obvious one. Keep copies, keep receipts, and treat every family conversation that involves money as if it might one day need to be reconstructed on paper. The second lesson is more existential. You cannot choose your family's morals, but you can choose the rigor of your response. That rigor does not make you cold, it makes you capable. The law is not sentimental, it does not cradle egos. It disciplines behavior. I do not tell you this for satisfaction. I tell you because so many people reading this will recognize the same pattern. An absent cousin who returns with deeds in their coat, a sibling who suddenly has a new car, a parent who has taken out loans to help someone. We live in a world of favors that calcify into theft when left unchecked. There is dignity in setting boundaries. There is dignity in bringing facts to an impartial office instead of screaming at a kitchen table. That is not cowardice, that is strategy. After the case, people asked me whether our family reunions would ever be the same. The answer is yes and no. We still speak in the dry, cautious way families speak when trust has been pierced. There are birthdays with an extra gap where a smile might have been. There are holidays where the conversation is thin. But there is also a steadiness I had not expected. A baseline defined by the fact that the worst had been exposed and addressed. You cannot wish away criminality with a napkin apology. You can, however, insist it be addressed where it belongs. I admit, there were nights when I thought about vengeance that had nothing to do with the law. There were small fantasies, public humiliation, a surprise exposure in front of neighbors, sharp words on a stage. They were childish. They passed. The law had already given me a better tool. What those fantasies had in common with the eventual strategy is the desire to be seen, to stop being the quiet reference point while others rearranged your life. Being seen is not the same as being praised. It is the literal fact that a record exists and that the culture of consequence acknowledges it. If you wonder whether I regret what I did, the answer is layered. I regret the betrayal. I regret the mess it made of people I once loved. I do not regret the choice to use law because without it the theft would have been normalized. Normalization is the enemy of justice. If a crime is normalized within a family, it becomes a tradition. I could not allow that. I also recognized that what I did was not perfect. Litigation takes you through a thicket of compromises. There were settlements that left me less whole than a hypothetical perfect recovery might have, but those are the transactions of real life, imperfect and necessary. There is an important caveat for anyone following this story: not every fight belongs in court. The legal system is not a therapeutic space for hurt feelings or poor choices. It is, though, the proper forum for fraud, theft, and clear breaches of fiduciary duty. The presence of intent and the presence of evidence are meaningful thresholds. When they exist, the courtroom can be less savage than rumor and more definitive than gossip. I leaned on that structure because I could. Not everyone can or should, but if you can, prepare to be clinical and to build your charts. This story changed me in small, cumulative ways. I am more skeptical. I am less inclined to accept verbal promises without corroboration. I check public records now the way some people check the weather. That might be called prudence or paranoia depending on what you bring to the table, but it is my armor. I also became more serious about mentorship. I speak to people who come to me with stories of family betrayals and advise them to document, to consult, and to find professionals who will not romanticize their pain. Emotional narratives are powerful. They are also unreliable in a court of law. Evidence is not. At the end of this, the house that had been stolen sits on its foundation, its windows unbroken, its floors worn by the same footsteps that used to walk them. I have kept many of the same things: a photograph of my father on a workbench, a chipped coffee mug with initials. Those artifacts anchor me to a version of home that is older than the wrongdoing. They are the things that remind me that property is more than a legal description of a deed. It is the memory that accumulates there. Returning to that physical space after a long absence felt like stepping into a ledger that had been balanced again. If there is a final image I want to leave you with, it is this: justice is often quiet. It is served in documents with stamps, in officers who read names, in judges who sign orders. It is not always satisfying in the melodramatic way people imagine. But when it lands with a clarity that no private revenge can match. In my case, the clarity allowed me to rebuild a life that was interrupted by greed. It allowed me to say, without flourish, that some things are not for sale. As we finish, one last practical note for anyone who recognizes themselves in this story: start documenting today. Make backups of deeds. Keep a digital file of every mortgage, every contract, every significant email. If things begin to go missing, call a lawyer early. An ounce of legal attention is worth a pound of heartache later. Be strategic. Be patient. And above all, know that you are not required to sacrifice your life because someone else has learned the tricks of forgery in small print. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, whether with anger, shock, or relief, please do something small that helps a creator like me tell more stories. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment below with your thoughts or questions, and share the video with one person who needs to hear this. I'm trying to grow a community of 5,000 subscribers. If you enjoy this kind of studied, documentary-style story, hit the subscribe button and help me reach 5,000. Your support pays for investigations, legal consultations, and fair storytelling. It's how we keep doing this. If you want more on this case, the forensic details, the timeline documents, or the legal forms we used, say so in the comments. I'll prepare a follow-up that dives into the technical side: how to spot forged signatures, which public records matter, and how to prepare documents for a prosecutor. For now, remember this: law is slow, but it is steady. It will not fix the past, but it can restore a correct account of it. And that restoration, in a world that too often values convenience over truth, is a small and essential victory. Thank you again. Please like and subscribe The Revenge Uncut, share this video and comment below. Help me reach 5,000 subscribers.